All right, Steve, you ready?
Born ready, sir.
I know, born fighting.
If we don't have a fight, why are we populists?
If you want to deliver a long monologue about the genius of Elon Musk and Silicon Valley, if you've had AI, an AI write one for you, we can do that too. But
no, I've got a very specific take on the oligarchs. I'll share it with you today.
That'll be good. I'm Ross Douthat, and this is Matter of Opinion, where we're hosting conversations about the different factions and groups and ideas contending for influence in the second Trump administration. Last time we talked to Marc Andreessen, the Silicon Valley venture capitalist who's a representative of what you might call the tech right, one of the newest factions exerting its influence within American conservatism and the Trump White House. This time I thought we'd go a little more OG and talk to someone who's been associated with Trumpian populism and the MAGA movement almost from the start. And that's one Steve Bannon. Steve is joining me from Washington, D.C. Steve, thanks so much for being with me.
Ross, thank you very much, but I got to correct you right out of the box. Please don't tell me, because I read your column, that you didn't consider Marc Andreessen a part of the right. Marc Andreessen and the oligarchs are nothing but a bunch of progressive leftists that had, most of them had their Damascene moment at, I don't know, between 10 and 11 o'clock on the evening of 5 November when the Trump movement won Pennsylvania. So no, I think the oligarchs they're not conservative. They're not certainly not on the right. And so everything they're doing, crawling on their belly to try to get into this movement and pollute this movement because they see the raw political power of this movement, I find disgusting and revolting.
All right, we're going to get into that. But first, I thought I should do a little resume refresher just at the top about who you are. It's a detailed resume. I'm a
convict.
That's at the end.
I'm a prisoner. I'm a convict. You just sum it up in that.
I think a man of parts is what we like to say. So we're going to say Steve Bannon, U.S. Navy, Goldman Sachs, Hollywood producer, impresario behind the success of the website Breitbart, founded by Andrew Breitbart, but I think raised to special prominence by yourself. One of Trump's leading strategists in 2016, an architect of an upset victory over Hillary Clinton, briefly a leading advisor to the Trump White House, exiled from Trump world after Michael Wolff's book Fire and Fury came out because you were a source, a would-be organizer of an international populist movement, host of the podcast show War Room, involved in the January 6th protests, and a very prominent promoter, then and now, of President Trump's stolen election claims. A 4-month stint in prison, see, I said we'd get around to it, for defying a subpoena from the January 6th committee. Released, Donald Trump wins. You've been in D.C. celebrating, while also, as we've already heard, attacking some of the president's key allies, including Elon Musk. Is that a fair sketch?
I think it's the through line. I'll do it quickly. Working class Kennedy Democrat family from a blue collar Catholic family that, father was essentially a foreman at the phone company and got to lower management, spent 50 years there as his father did, and helped organize the communication workers of America back in the 30s before it went off the rails. Stay-at-home mom, 5 kids, land-grant university, naval officer, educated at Harvard Business School, where that's the West Point of capitalism, particularly at the time, globalization. Studied under Michael Porter, the great theoretician of competitive advantage and globalization. He became an expert in intellectual property, met Andrew Breitbart, and helped him finance Breitbart. And then Andrew died tragically right before the launch of the Breitbart site. It was his site. He died literally 72 hours before we were about to launch. And was the first really group in back of President Trump. And I said from the beginning, I only gave a year of my life, so I didn't get run out of the White House. I'm not so sure I was run out of Trump world. I think I've always been it depends on how you define Trump world. Maybe we get to that later. But I've been working on populist nationalism for, 20 years. And I'm a hardcore populist. I'm a hardcore nationalist. I'm not a conservative. I think conservatives are pussies. The Republican Party is a bunch of pussies. They're controlled opposition. I think you see the culmination of a lot of work we've done, and you see the kind of what I call flood the zone, days of thunder, and it couldn't be better. Couldn't be a better time to be alive in the spring of this great effort.
So let's talk about the kind of populism that you've been involved with, basically from its beginnings as a force in global politics, right? Populism in the U.S. goes back to Andrew Jackson. It's had a lot of different incarnations, a lot of different versions, some more cultural, some more economic. People in my line of work have been arguing since Donald Trump came down the escalator about what Trumpism is, right? Is it about economics? Is it about class, race?
No.
So
hang on.
All right.
The public intellectuals, I consider you one of the top, have, and let's just be brutally frank.
Let's be.
Now, let's be brutally frank, have done a horrible job because you haven't had any interest in really understanding what populism is. It's this thing like Trump, it's always going to fade. It's just about Trump. And it's never about kind of the core, where this springs from, right? Where it comes from. We're 10 years, think about it, Trump came down in June of 15. And for 10 years, there's been no real work done to kind of even begin to understand populism, except that the deplorables are kind of like, you know, an exotic species like the San Diego Zoo. It's only now anybody's got any interest in really getting behind it, and I'm really appreciative of coming on your show. And of course, we've got to have some combat here, or otherwise it wouldn't be interesting. I have tremendous respect, but no one's really lifted a finger. It's very simple. You know, the Tea Party was the predecessor to Trump. Every financial collapse or every financial crisis you've had, I think, worldwide has some sort of reaction to it. In 2008, and the financial crisis and collapse of 2008 brought on by the established order and kind of, you know, a little bit the Bush regime, the Bush junta, what I call it. The worst, by the way, presidency in the history of our nation, except for James Buchanan.
Franklin Pierce just breathed a deep sigh of relief.
Yeah, no, but Franklin Pierce, come on, man, that guy's a record. Franklin Pierce did not that much damage that Bush did to the country on so many different levels, in particular the financial crisis, which was not totally his fault, but the established order. And the basic Schmendrick, making, I think at the time, the average salary is like, I don't know, $40,000. The basic Schmendrick underwrote all of that bailout and didn't get a bailout themselves. In fact, they got blown out of their equity, and they blamed it on African Americans and Hispanics that didn't have the income, but they blew them all out of the equity of their homes. And by the way, kept the title to those homes, I might add, so they could resell it later, refinance it. It's one of the greatest financial scandals in the history of this country. Nobody was held, none of the crooks and the criminals that did this were ever held accountable. And when I say crooks and criminals, I mean the top accounting firms, the law firms, the entire establishment. You having been an Ivy Leaguer also, and I went to the trade school at Harvard, none of the elites in this country were ever held accountable for it. And so that lit a fuse that went off on the 8th of November, the early morning of the 9th of November of 2016 with President Trump. And it was basically the forgotten man and woman's vengeance. Our platform at the time was fairly ill-defined. I mean, I came in a bunch of points behind, kind of with the Breitbart philosophy of economic nationalism up in the blue wall and the border down in the South in the border states. And I started looking at demographics. People were mocking me. Why? Bannon's never done a campaign. Why does he have Trump in Michigan? Why is he in Wisconsin? Why is he in Pennsylvania? He's not going to win those states. To get it close, he's got to focus on Southern. And we won all three of them now by a combination of, I think, 70,000 votes. But we won them, and that began. That was really the beginning of, or the culmination of the first phase of this kind of populist revolt. It's coming from the Tea Party in 2010, the big, off-year election victory. Then kind of a throughput.
So let me go back for a minute though to the genesis, right? Yep. So, and let me tell you what I see as sort of the Tea Party to Trump narrative, and you can tell me what's right or wrong with this story. To me, I agree. The Tea Party comes in as sort of the first reaction on the right to bailouts, to the financial crisis. But it starts out with, Rick Santelli giving this, famous cable news speech. But he's not talking about the biggest Wall Street bailouts, right? He's talking about basically bailouts for homeowners.
Yeah.
This is America. How many of you people want to pay for your neighbor's mortgage that has an extra bathroom and can't pay their bills? Raise their hand. How about we all? President Obama, are you listening?
And this turns into, for a little while in the history of the Tea Party, a narrative that sort of works well, I think, with what used to be movement conservatism. This narrative that the only problem here is big government. There's just too much spending. We have to cut spending. This gets taken up by Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan. They run in 2012 on big plans to overhaul Medicare and Social Security. That version loses. And then Trump comes in as someone who has no background in movement conservatism, like yourself, not a conservative, right? A populist, comes in and says, well, actually, we're going to protect Social Security and Medicare, right? We're not going to be the big government cutters. We're going to be economic nationalists. We're going to do industrial policy. We're going to change the trade rules. We're going to cut immigration and, try and raise wages that way and so on. And that to me is some of the same energy that's in the Tea Party, but it's a pretty different agenda and a clearer break in principle with what came before. This is just a 2016.
No. You're 1,000% correct. Your first guy said you're 1,000% correct. Let me give some depth to that for a second. But the Tea Party mainly had the classic limited government conservatives, right? And you see this and kind of what I call the traditional, the grassroots that had really come up from President Reagan's time. But what I saw in there, they couldn't articulate it. They were still speaking in an old nomenclature. And I saw this in the 12 campaign in the primary.
Right.
That kind of, and remember, I recruited, is a very famous story. I tried to recruit Sarah Palin. I saw Sarah Palin. I said, wow, that's a populist right there. And I spent a year making a film with her and tried to talk her into running as a true populist for the nomination. I didn't realize Romney was normally next man up for the Republicans. But there you saw the kind of nomenclature, even calling Republicans and Democrats. What became very obvious to me, given my HBS training at Goldman Sachs, is that you had kind of a populist, more nationalistic flavor on one side, and you had a globalist, more elitist in the others. And what happened is that when I knew a lot of the donors at that time because Breitbart was getting to be kind of got some traction, and I was starting to meet some of these donors. They were absolutely convinced that Romney and Ryan were going to win. And these people were crushed. They thought, and I told them early on, I said, Romney, this thing's not going to be close. It'll be a couple of points at least, because they're not connecting, and they didn't even want any connection to the Tea Party. But I said, there's something brewing out there that's much different. These people's lives are being destroyed. The country's slipping away. All the high value manufacturing jobs are going to China. And you saw at the beginning of even the H-1B visas and discussions about this were all starting to percolate at that time. And when those guys lost, I realized that, hey, the people here really don't get it. And what happened right after that is a guy named Reince Priebus, who I didn't know at the time, was running the RNC. They did this thing called the hot wash-up, or the
autopsy.
The autopsy. Thank you. They did the autopsy. They did the autopsy, and I was reading, and I think it was Real Clear Politics. It was a guy named Sean Trendy. And he does this analysis about how the white working class wouldn't support Romney. They didn't reach out to him. And he said there's a clear path here that you can win by a more of a populist coalition talking about working class things. And I said, hey, guys, this guy's nailed it. This is it. And they came back to me and said, no, you missed it. It's amnesty. It's everything like that. And I just took the other side and said, no, this is the winning philosophy here. And I met with Jeff Sessions and Stephen Miller, who I was very close to. And I said at the time, I said, we got to find a populist candidate. I said, Jeff, you're an agrarian populist. I said, we can even start with you to get it out there. And again, he says, no, I'm not the guy, but that guy will arrive. And then I started going to these cattle calls early on where you got to get the grassroots. And it was May 1st, I think, of 2014, where I went to, I think it was Hanover, New Hampshire, with Breitbart Radio. Rand Paul was there, and Mike Lee was there, and Ted Cruz was there, and Newt Gingrich, all of them. And this guy, Donald Trump. And the nomenclature from everybody else was all the same. They may have a different inflection or a different take, but it didn't have any depth to it. It didn't resonate. It didn't grab people viscerally. Trump came up there, just starts, it's like Mort Saul. He's just taking the day's headlines and just riffing on it. But in riffing on it and talking about the border and jobs in China, people were leaning for it in their seats. And I called later and told Miller and Sessions and others, I said, this is our guy. I said, if this guy's serious about this, we can do this. This guy is the personification of what we need. He's a hammer. He's a man's man. And if he's serious, which at the time there's a big question, I always thought he was serious. Big question. He's just doing this to negotiate a better deal for the apprentice. And the people who knew him best, like Roger Ailes, would tell me, Bannon, you're a fucking moron. This is a negotiating strategy. You look like an idiot. So that's really, Trump's version of populism. And it's both cultural and economic. But it's really a push against an established order that's truly globalist in nature and has really lost the touch of the American people with the working class and lower middle class in this country, which are the backbone of the country. And that's why I just said, hey, we just got to start focusing on these folks. And eventually, we got to work out some policies that work, but we just got to and make the not just America first, but make the American citizen first. And if we do that, this is gonna turn out fine.
Yeah, I want to get into the policy from the first term, but it's just worth thinking about, like the time you're talking about, the most powerful idea in sort of elite discourse about politics was this idea that there was a sort of emerging Democratic majority that basically consisted of, white, college-educated, socially liberal Americans, and then, the growing population of especially Hispanic voters, minority voters, and so on. And that the only way for the Republican Party to compete in this environment was, as you say, to either become more liberal on social issues generally, or to become more liberal on immigration in particular. And Sean Trende wrote this series called The Missing White Voters, basically. And it's funny about how there were all these voters, right, who didn't turn out for Romney, who could turn out for a Republican. And then the other argument connected to that also turned out to be right, was that there were a lot of Hispanic voters who weren't actually interested in necessarily voting for open borders, large-scale illegal immigration, who were culturally conservative, who didn't want to vote for a sort of racist-seeming Republican Party, but would be open to a kind of populist appeal. And it's funny because I used to go on cable news back then in a different incarnation of my life. I was on a few times with Stuart Stevens, who ran Romney's campaign in 2012.
Right.
And this was while Trump, the Trump campaign was getting going and competing. And look, I didn't think Trump was going to win, right? So I don't claim any foresight there. But Stevens would come on and he would say, Trump is trying to get voters who just aren't there. He's like going up the river, beating the drums, trying to summon voters from the hills, and they're just not there. And that was the default assumption that I do think not just your 2016 campaign, but then 2024 proved wrong.
We'll get to that. He's kind of the epitome of the dumb, lazy, and he seems like a decent guy, but it's just moronic because it's cable TV puts this stuff up all the time. I want to go back to something. I cannot overemphasize enough how powerful Sean Trende's. This is the reason I read everything. I read all the journals, read everything. That hit me right in the solar plexus. I go, that is exactly what happened. I couldn't get anybody to pay attention to it. People, I tell you, I got to pay attention to it was Stephen Miller. I'd met Stephen and Sergio Gore, who are now huge players in the White House, were two grundoons on the staff of Michelle Bachmann, who was eventually the person that did kind of try to run as a populist.
Another name out of the mists of memory.
But I tell people, hey, people get hot, and the gods give charisma, and then if you don't grab it, like Chris Christie in 12 or Michelle Bachmann and Palin, when you get the ability to grab it, you got to grab it, because if you don't grab it, the gods take it away. Let's go back to Sean Trende. I would actually say that was an inflection point in American history, because it got me excited about what the possibilities were and what the math was. What really proved our chops was right after I saw Trump in May 1st of 2014, 6 weeks later, Zuckerberg, that criminal, was coming here to get the amnesty deal done in this huge announcement the night before on Tuesday, I think the 7th of June in 2014. An economics professor named Dave Brad from Randolph-Macon actually defeated Eric Cantor, the first time a sitting majority leader had ever been defeated in a primary. And ran on 100% a anti-immigration platform. That was really the beginning of the feeling of the power. We really had something here that could win elections and win votes.
So let's just drill down on immigration for a minute. Why is it so central? And what do you say to someone who might be on the left, who'd be listening to this conversation and would say, oh, look, Bannon's absolutely right. There was a financial crisis. Wall Street got away with murder. Not literally, just to be clear, but and there needed to be a populist surge. But all being anti-immigration does is scapegoat a bunch of hardworking people trying to come to America for the sins of global finance and so on. What is the...
No, it's a reason. You just mentioned a moment ago the emerging Democratic majority. And the reason that didn't happen, I never thought it would happen, because Bernie Sanders and all these guys that have been pro-worker and pro-union, you saw them flip. All of a sudden, they were open borders. Look, let me step back for a second. The entire post-war international rules-based order, right? All of it, Bretton Woods and all of it, the Pax Americana, is all on the shoulders of the little guy. It gets down to the shoulders of the working class and the middle class. And you can see the Democratic Party transferring into of very wealthy donors, the credential class of a bunch of people coming out of college or graduate schools, and then the plebeians. The key on immigration, and I'm anti any immigration. I want a moratorium on all immigration right now because I want American citizens to get a shot at the brass ring, which they deserve, since the entire world's economic system is on their shoulders, and it's the same people whose taxes and pension money support everything, where their sons and daughters are standing watch on destroyers and carrier battle groups in the Red Sea to keep the Suez Canal open for trade to Europe. They're on patrol in the Hindu Kush. They're in Romania with the 101st Airborne. And, I saw it. I served in that. And all the people on my destroyer post-Vietnam in the all-volunteer forces had a choice in those early years of the Navy were jail or the military. And my daughter later went to West Point, fought in Iraq, and all of her I think of 16 enlisted guys, her first command, 16 enlisted guys, I think 12 were minorities who had done an average of 10 or 12 tours and had broken families and all the pressure. So the pressures, it's on them for the system to work, yet they get no real benefits from the system. And most importantly, the capitalists are always trying to drive down wages. Now, they do it two ways. They either allow illegal immigration at the border, which drives down wages of lower skilled workers, particularly African Americans and Hispanic. But they also scam the system with a whole set of visa programs, and they call it kind of fancy names, the H-1B visas. All they're trying to do is bring in indentured servants into the country at a third less or 50% less, and very compliant about what they have to do to make sure they don't have to pay American graduates. And this is why Silicon Valley is an apartheid state. It's the reason you have no Hispanics or blacks. There's no shot to get in Silicon Valley. It's not because Americans are dumber. It's not because Americans are lazy. It's because American citizens you have a globalist system, and the capitalist, because we're in a capitalist system, are always looking to drive labor costs down. And the Democratic Party could have done this, but Bernie Sanders and all the guys who supported labor all became open borders on immigration. And they made it some sort of racial or xenophobic thing. And I kept telling people, hey, I don't give two fucks if you call me a racist. I don't give two fucks you call me a xenophobe or anything like that. I'm standing up for the American citizen. I come from a working class family. And I can tell you that when they fully understand the economics and they look around at what's happening, African Americans and Hispanic families are going to vote for us. And Sean Trendy gave us a little bit of a map that you could see it, and he could back it up with math. We did a little bit of action, but it was just kind of putting it in a direction. It was so obvious it was there. It was so obvious it's there, and it's so obvious it only get bigger and bigger and bigger if we deliver it now on policies. We got to be a lot, and we're going to have some massive fights on policies because the dumb, lazy media keeps saying the Republican Party is all Trump. He controls it. He controls it because they fear him, but you scratch the surface of most of these congressmen and almost all the senators, they're just standard stock Republicans. They're neoliberal neocons.
Let's talk about the first term, Trump's first term, and how this cashed out then. And I want to read a quote.
It's a little bit of a dog. It's a little bit of a dog's breakfast policy-wise.
Yeah. I just want to read a quote from you via Michael Wolff. So we can take it with a slight grain of salt. But this is you talking just before Trump was inaugurated, and he quoted you saying, "Look, the conservatives are going to go crazy. I'm the guy pushing $1 trillion infrastructure plan. With negative interest rates throughout the world, it's the greatest opportunity to rebuild everything. Shipyards, ironworks, get them all jacked up. We're just going to throw it up against the wall and see if it sticks. It'll be as exciting as the 1930s, greater than the Reagan Revolution," right? So that's a vision of populism where it's secure borders, it's cutting immigration, it's everything that you've just been talking about, but it's also industrial policy. Rebuilding industry.
Yes.
And I think it's fair to say that, a lot of that just didn't happen in Trump term one, right?
Ross, hang on, stop.
Okay, good.
We had 300 infrastructure weeks.
All right. Yes, that's right. No, were there only 300? Every week was infrastructure week.
I'm adding up all 4 years. So I don't know if maybe I've overcounted. It just seemed like 300 infrastructure weeks.
Every week was infrastructure week. Yeah. So what happened to that? What happened to that? The industrial policy side of things.
So hang on. So I step in and take it over. And I ran for student body president and as a junior in college and won. I had never done anything in politics since then. Never been to a campaign office. I had no fucking idea what I was doing. But we figured that given how badly the campaign was being run, that I couldn't do worse than close this thing up, to a couple point loss, worst case. And so we made a coalition. I made a pact with the Republican establishment. We had to win.
Well, you got it with a coalition, right? And the coalition doesn't want industrial policy. They don't want the big deal spending. And so that doesn't happen. Yeah. And I'm going to try and bring us forward quickly to the present. Right?
It's a fail in transition. We just don't have the people. And President Trump's not there, and the mandate's really not to take on the administrative state. We do get the tax cut, which I'm not happy with. And I lose that. President Trump will listen to you. He'll look at the facts, and he makes the decision, no, he does his tax cut, the same one that we're going to have a fight on again that's coming up to be renewed. But we do deregulation. We get enough done that you get and President Trump's a man of peace. So by 18 and 19, the fall of 19, low interest rates, low inflation,
the economy is good and it's better. Yes. No, I think this is absolutely true. It's better even without the $1 trillion infrastructure bill. It's better for blue collar workers than it was under Obama. And
infrastructure, you're correct, was an epic fail. The Republican establishment had zero interest in that. Mitch McConnell, zero interest. We had a couple of infrastructure weeks and they just considered it a joke and we never made any progress.
So flash forward. So here we are. We're back. Trump has more of a mandate for some form of populism than before. He clearly has more of a mandate on illegal immigration, in part just because of how much of it there's been under Biden. So clearly you've got a populist focus on that issue, right? It's no question about that. But on everything else, what does populism want as a movement on economic policy from this administration? And related to that, the administrative state stuff. And we're having this conversation in a week where a bunch of the headlines are about both the Trump team trying to sort of, take more control over the agencies, also claim more power from Congress. There's going to be a Supreme Court battle probably over presidential authority over sort of certain kinds of spending. But you say deconstruct the administrative state. Okay, for what? What is the actual goal of that?
We're totally different now. I shouldn't say totally different. It's right now we have in the days of Thunder, we have scale, we have depth, and we have urgency. How do we even get there? For 4 years, so when Trump leaves on January 20th of 2021, and when he gets back to Mar-a-Lago, it's the lion and winter, right? And the only reason that the McCarthy's guys go down is make sure the lion's still caged. It's all DeSantis and Nikki Haley and, the next thing. He's done. He's finished. And now you're to the hardcore populist, even on our audience. At the same time, something very important happens. There are both donors, not many of them, and public intellectuals and guys that are going to start these the small think tanks. And you have Brooke Rollins, who was in the White House. She was head of the Domestic Policy Council, and Stephen Miller essentially set up America First Policy Institute. Russ Vought, who was OMB and a critical guy in the first administration, one of the secret weapons, starts Center for Renewing America with Paoletta and Jeff Clark, and Heritage does Project 2025. And you've got a few more, but you got these 4 or 5 groups, and kind of we call the rubric Project 2025. It's to take policy, because one of the problems we definitely had is that there's a gap between the populist nationalist promise and the populist nationalist delivery. And that has got to be in policy. And so you have, and including, you got to keep along that Nikki Haley, 14 or 15%, maybe 18, 20% of traditional Republicans that are just not there with you, right? They'll be there if you give them a policy suite that they can buy into. And you need those people. You need them to win as you expand your own populace with African Americans, Hispanics, but they're a bridging element. So over the 4 years, you have serious public intellectuals for the first time thinking through serious policy alternatives on military strategy, national security, foreign policy, economics, all of it. But you've also had, as important as a policy art, you have people starting working as a team, networking. Remember, you're building teams and networks of subject matter experts, and people know how to work together. And we're flooding the zone with the cabinet nominations. This is just so much different. Now, what I was able to do was just not on policy verticals, but also taking on the Leviathan. And this is where I take special pride and tell the limited government service, go fuck yourself because you didn't do shit except get this thing fucking bigger so it's out of control. The deconstruction of the administrative state, and this goes back to 16, this is why Gorsuch is on the Supreme Court. This is why Kavanaugh to a degree. This is a young group of intellectual people in the judiciary that are very focused on this fourth branch of government that's metastasized to basically become a permanent government. And basically, whoever wins, whether it's Bernie Sanders or AOC or Donald Trump, right? It doesn't matter. They're the permanent government, and they got a permanent way to do it. That has to be deconstructed, and that's one of the things I'm so proud of.
But I want to go back. I want to go back to the populist. So the voter, right? The blue collar voter in 2016, it's the blue collar white voter. In 2024, it's the middle class Hispanic voter. They vote for Trump in part because they agree with a populist critique of how the economy has been run the last 25 years, in part in this election because they were just sick of inflation and the border being out of control. What is the concrete deliverable for those voters out of the deconstruction of the administrative state? That's what I'm trying to get at.
The concrete deliverable first is the deportation. First off, for remember, if you don't vote for the Democrats, that's one vote to us. If you vote for us, it's 2 vote swing. The first step is just to say, these guys have done nothing but fuck you the entire time. Why are you continuing to vote for them? And I think they started to see that as we started to bring up immigration. They could see it in their communities, not just the lawlessness and the crowding of the schools, all that, but the competition for wages and for labor. This is what it was about. That's the first time that people were prepared to listen to you. That, hey, these guys aren't a bunch of white racists, nativists, et cetera. They're actually talking about my economics, and they understand in my communities, not the lawlessness, the schools, the medical, which is all terrible because of the flooding of this, and the elite don't care because they don't have to deal with it.
But is it just immigration then? Is that what it? I mean, I'm not trying to minimize immigration. We had the largest the largest surge under Biden in decades. Yes. All of that's real.
And inflation, to me, by the way, and hang on,
and inflation. But inflation cuts both ways, right? Because yes, immigration gives you competition for jobs, but immigration also can reduce prices, right? You take low-skilled workers out of the economy, prices go up, right? That cuts in both directions. But I just want to focus in for a minute, because to me, looking at a lot of the different people you've mentioned and the agenda you're talking about, right? To me, there's still sort of a through line from the Tea Party era where you have a lot of people voting for Republicans who hadn't voted for Republicans before, who have sort of big picture economic concerns, law and order concerns, and so on. But there's a part of the Republican Party that I think is part of your sort of vision of the MAGA coalition, right? That still wants to deliver those voters. We're going to keep taxes low for the upper class, and we're going to pay for it by cutting Medicaid and so on, right? And like that still seems like a pretty powerful part of whatever the Republican Party is right now.
We're about to see. This is why I'm so adamant. We can't have one big beautiful bill. We need two bills. So you're
on tax policy
for the donor class and the Wall Street Journal and Murdoch's. You're 1,000,000% correct. They want the permanent installation of the Trump tax cuts. They're all welfare queens on corporate welfare, and this is why I'm so adamantly opposed to them. I support the president, but look, I didn't support the tax plan in the beginning, and I still think my ideas would have been even better for President Trump and the country, although his turned out pretty well. But if you look at roughly, as Scott Besson said the other day, I think that it's $4 trillion. It'll be the biggest tax increase in history if it's not $4 trillion. 2.6 trillion of that goes to people enjoying incomes under $400,000. Still over $1 trillion, 1.2 trillion goes to the wealthy. And my point is quite simple. Not only you're not going to get the tax cut, you're going to get dramatic tax increases unless we can get spending under control. And when I say spending under control, I mean $1 trillion a cut this year. When they talk about the 10-year cycle, they're lying to you. It's irrelevant. I worked at Goldman in turnarounds. The only thing we should be talking about is fiscal year 25 and fiscal year 26. Those 2 years, what do we cut? How close can we get to a realistic financial model, economic model that gets us close? And the best way to do this is put a gun to the head of the wealthy and say, okay, fuckers, if you don't help us cut spending by backing your lobbyists off and backing off the corporatists and backing off all the guys, your big shareholders, and you yourself, if we don't get that out, and let's start with the defense budget. We just agreed to a $900 billion NDAA, which, as a former serving naval officer and a guy's daughter went to West Point and she gave 8 years of her life, we got skin in the game. We're hawks. The defense budget is an obscenity and must be cut. Unless we're prepared to do that, then your taxes are going to go up, and not just your income taxes. We're going to have financial taxes, the carried interest, all of it, financial tax. We're going to get to a balanced budget, and we're not going to do it in the back of the little guy. In fact, the no tax on tips is just what President Trump has promised over and over again: no tax on overtime and no tax on Social Security, which is the big kahuna. So we have, Ross, I think roughly another $500 billion shortage on revenue. So we're probably 4.5 with the tax cuts the populists need for the people to get more income to the American citizen, the hardworking American citizen. So no, I'm adamant about this, and I'll.
So you're saying basically do a version of the tax reauthorization that actually takes out some of the upper bracket stuff, and combine that with discretionary spending cuts. I just want to be clear: is that the combination?
Yes, but I want to go. Let's go back in time just a bit to the first 90 days of the Biden regime.
Okay. Just for a minute. Yeah.
Just for a minute. But they put forward this huge tax the wealthy, tax the billionaires. It didn't even get a committee hearing. It was performed as a joke to hang out there.
Right.
I'm talking about significant spending cuts starting in defense, and Medicare and Social Security are off to the side. Okay. Significant spending cuts. And if we don't get the cuts and the wealthy don't have some cuts, I don't want to increase taxes on wealthy just because I believe in soak the rich. Maybe I do, but I would not want to be part of policy. Right. I want to do that to get our financial house in order, because we just can't keep borrowing at $1 trillion every 100 days. So yes, if we can't balance it, in addition with the more tax cuts for the working class, particularly Social Security, then that gap, we got to close that gap from $2 trillion. And CBO backs me up. House Freedom Caucus says it's going to be $2 trillion a year. We got to close that. I think it's spending cuts, and if it has to be, increase taxes. Not just they don't get the tax cuts reinstalled from Trump 17, but you actually increase taxes on these people. And that, I believe in incentives. I think, Ross, that will incentivize the donor class to get focused on cutting government spending. Let's make them part of the process. So that's the only way you can do it. And, when I mention tax cuts, now I'm going to tell you, when I go around and give speeches, I gave one to Wall Street, a third of the audience of a Wall Street crowd standing ovation, 2/3, 1/3 didn't applaud, and 1/3 spit on the floor. But when I go to Denton, Texas, and places like that, and I say this program about increased tax for wealthy, standing ovation. The people are there and the voters are there.
I think you're totally right that there is a big constituency, especially now that the party has been transformed, of Republican and populist-leaning Republican voters who would be fine with some soaking the rich in the context of a bigger budget deal. I'm completely skeptical that there is any large-scale elite faction, including everyone you just described, who are fanning out over the agencies, that would be up for that beyond, on the margins. Can the Trump administration tax university endowments? Sure, absolutely. They can do that. Just maintaining the changes to the state and local tax deduction that was, I think, one of the genuinely populist victories of the first Trump term, and I should say it soaked me, right? It soaked the upper middle class in blue states. Just maintaining that, I think, will be challenging. But I want to turn us and bring us back to where we started, I guess, because the last conversation I had ended with me arguing with the guest, who was Mark Andreessen, the Silicon Valley venture capitalist, about whether he and his allies, who also have a big role in the Trump administration, who are filling a lot of jobs, could easily find big spending cuts. I'm just generally a skeptic of the ability to find big spending cuts. So maybe that's one small point of overlap between you and, I won't call them the tech right, we'll just call them Silicon Valley people who support Donald Trump.
No, Ross,
we don't even have to go into the overlap.
Stop. No, I'm not going to. You're too smart. You're one of the leading public intellectuals, particularly on the right.
Go on.
You are. They're oligarchs.
They're
100% oligarchs. They believe in technofeudalism. Look, they're all down here for one reason. They either knew we were going to win, they were smart enough to look at the math, or they saw after we won. I mean, Facebook's Damascene moment wasn't until 10 o'clock that night. Now he's down there. They're oligarchs who believe in technofeudalism. They have nothing. They're not even on the spectrum where we can argue against Rachel Maddow and AOC and Bernie Sanders on the spectrum of that's. They're not on the spectrum.
So
they're
what
they're a totally different thing.
This phrase is sitting here in my notes because you've used it a bunch. Technofeudalism. We've talked about immigration, right? You've talked about the idea that Silicon Valley is basically trying to bring in as much foreign labor as possible to presumably keep its own costs down. That's obviously part of what you mean by technofeudalism. But I don't think that's all of it, right? This is not just about H-1B visas.
No.
Suppose Elon Musk came in tomorrow and said, "No, it's fine, I'm reforming the H-1B program." You would still disagree with him. So give me a broader view of what you think is wrong with the Silicon Valley view.
Just a quick bunch of history. The Obama is the most, in the progressive administration of him and Biden, the most reactionary in American history. Number one, he made a Faustian bargain with the sociopathic overlords in Wall Street to bail us out of the 2008 crisis, which still hasn't been resolved. At the same time, the Obama and the established order went to Silicon Valley and made a deal with them. And the deal was the following: we will allow you to become the wealthiest people in the history of the world. We will let you create an apartheid state. We will let you become monopolies. We will get no anti-trade. In fact, that's why you got Google and search, you got Facebook and what they do, you got Twitter and what they do. You've got Amazon destroying small business for the CCP. Every one of these guys is a monopoly. In the Justice Department for 10 or 12 years has just looked the other way. So we'll let you become monopolies. We'll let you become the wealthiest people on earth. But here's the bargain. Here's what you have to do. You have to make the hegemon, the United States, and the post-war international rules-based order, and the ruling class of this country, you have to make us a dominant technological power of which we have the commanding heights can never be questioned. And over the last 72 hours, what we've seen is two things. Number one, in social media, the Chinese Communist Party and the PLA created TikTok, which is far more powerful than all the social media platforms of these guys put together, right? Forget that they use the information and the ownership. I'm just talking about the addictive nature and how evil can be put in there. And we now know that all the really, let's say hundreds of billions of dollars, not tens of billions, that we put into the theory of the case of blunt force computing power that, the Green New Deal's forgotten, climate change is forgotten. You got to build power generators everywhere. You got to give over federal land for data centers everywhere. We got to burn more coal, more oil for these data centers because our method of AI, we understand that if this is not a psyop, which I don't think it totally is, we've had our Sputnik moment, and guess what? The oligarchs that we created, who were all progressive Democrats, absolutely fucking face-planted. Now, here's the point. In techno-feudalism, you're just a digital serf. You're valued as a human being, as someone built and made in the image and likeness of God and endowed with the life spirit of the Holy Spirit. They don't consider that. Everything's digital to them. They are, at the end of the day, transhumanist. And what is transhumanist? Transhumanist is somebody who sees Homo sapien here and Homo sapien plus, right? Plus on the other side, what they call the singularity. And that's why they're all rushing, whether it's artificial intelligence, regenerative robotics, quantum computing, advanced chip design, CRISPR, biotech, all of it to come to this point of which the oligarchs are going to lead that revolution. And why are they going to do it? Number one, when you get to know them and see where they're spending the money, it's because they want eternal life. You know why? Because they're complete atheistic 11-year-old boys that are kind of science fiction, Dungeons and Dragons guys. And we've turned the nation over to that. And yes, I'm going to fight it every fucking step of the way. This is taking us back a millennium to feudalism. This is what their business model is based upon that. And the progressive left made a deal with these guys. They're all lefties. Elon had the first awakening because he could kind of, as an engineer, you could kind of see the math. He fully supported our plan of a base plus election to go get the low information voters and the Moms for America who had flipped during the pandemic. He backed that strategy, and the dude wrote a $250 million check over 5 months, unprecedented, to back our play. He's the first, but the rest of them, even Andreessen, they're all super progressive liberals. They're all techno-feudalists. They don't give a flying fuck about the human being, and I don't care if you're black, white, Hispanic, Chinese, they don't care. And they have to be stopped. If we don't stop it, and we don't stop it now, it's going to destroy not just this country, it's going to destroy the world. And you see this artificial intelligence. We have no controls over this. We've allowed these monopolies to exist. And now we know they're getting their ass handed to them, I think, by the Chinese Communist Party. We're in deep shit right now. We're in a crisis.
All right. I want to go to the transhumanist stuff first, and then to the policy stuff and Trump and whether any of this can be stopped. So to me, I think that there are different groups in Silicon Valley. I think that you're right that generally people, including readers of this newspaper, listeners of this podcast, underestimate just how weird the long-term ambitions of a lot of people deeply involved in Silicon Valley are, especially around artificial intelligence, and that there is this sort of.
Balaj and the network state. Let's talk about that. They're not weird.
Well,
they're radicals. Right. They're radicals.
That's a the network state we can save for the next time I have you on. For now, let's just focus on.
I'm going to be invited.
You're going to be invited.
We got breaking news. Bannon's actually going to be invited back.
We're gonna every week, man. So listen. So the transhumanism stuff, though. So to me, it seemed like one of the things that pulled Elon Musk into the conservative coalition was that while he's certainly not a religious conservative, but he is a kind of weirdo humanist, right? He likes the human race. He wants the human race to continue.
Stop.
No, okay.
Stop.
So you don't see. To me, it seems like Musk is in one group.
Musk is
just as transhumanist as the rest of them.
No, since Edison, maybe our greatest applied engineer.
Okay,
he is a genius in that level. Agreed. And so he looks at the thing as all kind of mathematical equations and from engineering in a big brain. When he puts on something, he can solve it. He is the most prominent of that crowd that's warned against artificial intelligence and artificial general intelligence. It's one of the reasons he and the Altman at OpenAI have had so many big fights. Besides
not big fans of each other. Yep.
They hate each other. I mean, and part of that's personal, but part of it is philosophical. And Brother Musk is probably the farthest down the line because he's the most advanced in chipping. So I think Neuralink is one of the most aggressive about Homo sapien 1.0 or Homo sapien 2.0, Elon is at the tip of this. And Elon is actually on an applied engineering basis, not bullshit talk. He is probably the farthest advanced for transhumanism. People have to understand in the life, and I say life, next 10 years of your audience, we're going to be facing a dilemma for yourself and your kids. Do you enhance yourself? Do you enhance yourself either by genetic engineering? Do you enhance yourself by advanced chip design plugged into you? Do you advance yourself by artificial intelligence? Elon's one of the top accelerationists about driving this thing faster at accelerating at an increasing rate. You're going to have to make a choice in your own life, not just politically in society, your own life. Do I do this? Am I a Luddite? Will I get left behind? More importantly, will my children get left behind? Do my children have a shot to really play sports in a Division I level? Or do my kids have a ability to go to an Ivy League school unless I get them enhanced? These questions, deep questions, never before handled in mankind's history, are going to happen and going to happen in the next couple of years.
But so let's then take it back to politics, right? I don't see this critique that you're offering, a kind of, we'll call it a kind of religious humanist critique of Silicon Valley, where AI is going, maybe where, digital augmentation is going. I don't see this as expressed in any kind of powerful way in the Trump White House. 2 weeks in, making big announcements with Sam Altman, right? Big announcements about investing in AI. One of the main reasons, clearly from my conversation with Mark Andreessen, that part of Silicon Valley swung toward Trump was a fear of regulation on AI from the Biden administration. I completely agree with you that the Obama era made this kind of broad-based deal with Silicon Valley. Different people would describe it differently, but there was a deal. The Biden administration reneged on the deal, right? They did antitrust stuff. They tried to regulate all these things.
I'm going to disagree with you. The whole of government and leading the whole of society had a thing that they wanted a few large entities of which they then could kind of try to control, right? And stop the entrepreneurs. And that's, I think, Andreessen in the venture capital community.
Yeah, Andreessen, he obviously did not like that. But I mean, from your perspective, right, if AI is a threat to our humanity, and it's going to happen in some form, it's going to happen in China in some form, right? Wouldn't it be better to have the Biden approach of a kind of state capture of AI than to have, endless proliferating technology? Or is it better to have, which form of AI do you, as an AI skeptic, prefer? The Andreessen version or the Biden, three big company version?
If you have, Ross, if you have the beginning of the kinetic part of the Third World War and the Eurasian landmass, and you have...
Meaning China versus Taiwan, just to put it in layman's terms.
No, I mean 1,000,007 people killed in Ukraine or wounded in Ukraine.
Okay.
The Middle East. I'm talking about that. And by the way, China
we have
ready
already.
to go. Yeah. I'm saying Trump's got to handle that. The problems are such a scale, and what he's doing there is magnificent. Now, when you talk about the deeper issues we face, it's a process. I've started off, when I first started this, people that I really admire were just like, populism, what are you talking about? It's like, and don't say nationalism, because that's, nationalism doesn't go to a good place. I said, no, we're populist nationalists. So I've had long odds before. This one's long odds. Now we've got the Sputnik moment that, can you let the Chinese Communist Party get ahead of you? Can you let these bad actors get ahead of you? And now we're in a horrible national security dilemma. And yes, President Trump, as he always does, and this is the way President Trump rolls, President Trump listens to a lot of voices, and he will think it over, and then he'll make a decision. And clearly, the broligarchs have, because of their ability to get in there, and also I consider the inauguration day like they're on display, like on the deck of the battleship Missouri, and he's MacArthur, and they're there. They're the Imperial Japanese staff sending the surrender document, but they're in there. They're inside the wire.
Well, and there's a difference. I think what you said about Zuckerberg, though, is right. There's a group of people in tech who decided to support Trump the night that he won the 2024 election. That's absolutely true. And a lot of the guys who were there for the inauguration were I think defeated generals paraded in a Roman triumph, right? But Musk is not like that, right? Musk is not like that.
No.
A bunch of the people around Musk are not like that.
Yes, and I don't think Andreessen's like that either.
Right. No, these are people who were already deeply alienated from.
Hang on. Andreessen and Musk are smart enough to be able to get below the surface on the numbers and see the direction of the country and climb on board as the techno-feudalist early on. They are hardcore techno-feudalists. They're not populists. I tease Elon all the time. If I could turn him from a techno-feudalist globalist to a populist nationalist, we could make some progress here. He's definitely a techno-feudalist, one of the hardest core. And so is Andreessen. Andreessen, these guys are smart. I mean, Andreessen, these guys, you're talking about genius level intelligence. These are not dumb people. But they're not with us when it comes to the little guy. Listen.
Right. Well, their view is let's give it its due, right? Their view is connected to the argument you just made, right? Which is that there's a technological frontier. We are competing with China on a technological frontier. Andreessen basically made a kind of his own. He did not make a populist argument, but he made a nationalist argument. He said, look, we want, and what the Trump administration has promised us is for America to win, for our companies to win, for us to outcompete the Chinese and have what it takes to keep America, sort of ahead of the curve, which we are at the moment. Even, yes, I agree, deep seek, the sort of the Chinese AI raises a lot of questions about AI strategy.
I don't believe one fucking sentence of that. They don't believe that. They believe in this country because right now it protects them and provides some benefits to them. Remember, we bailed out these fucks on Silicon Valley Bank. Biden bailed them out when they couldn't make payroll. They could make payroll if they put more of their own money in, but they wouldn't. They have little guy bail them out in the Silicon Valley Bank. Now, in the last couple of days, what are they talking about? Oh my gosh, we need a Marshall Plan. We need a space plan. We need a Mercury Plan. We need hundreds of billions of dollars from taxpayers. They want essentially a bailout. If it's a Sputnik moment, somebody's got to ask the question, Andreessen, we made a deal with you guys. Elon, we made a deal with you guys. We made you oligarchs. We made you the richest people in the fucking history of the earth. We stopped any antitrust. That's what pisses me off the most. No antitrust, not breaking these companies up and allowing entrepreneurs to get in there.
Right.
And because Mark Andreessen doesn't believe in the entrepreneurial system in the country. No way.
I don't know. Just to defend prior guests on this program as a matter of policy, I think there is a big difference between how the big social media companies regarded themselves and how venture capital world regarded itself. I'm not going to look into anybody's soul and think about whether they believe in America, but they believe in a different form of competition than does Google and Facebook and so on. I think that's real, and I think that's why they've always been. That's why they were always more sympathetic to the right.
But I'm not saying even Andreessen's a bad guy at the heart of it, but they're not. They don't think of the sovereign. They're American as an idea. America's not an idea. It's not. Right. It's a country with a border and a group of citizens that's the greatest resource we've ever had. And the apartheid state of Silicon Valley thinks we don't need our greatest resource, which are the American citizens. They'd rather import basically indentured servants to work at third less and have an apartheid state. And then as soon as they can replace them with digital serfs,
all right, let's bring it. So that's good. Let's bring it back to policy and then to Trump himself. On policy, again, I don't think any of this is happening. But what is, what is the specific populist answer to the oligarchs that you're talking about? Is it, Trump should keep Lina Khan around and do antitrust stuff? Is it, taxation on these companies? Is it just not spending money and not investing in AI? Is it regulations on AI? What you could wave a magic wand and have the Trump White House do what you want around this stuff. What would you do?
Number one, I would be a huge supporter of Lina Khan remaining, and I would love to see Lina Khan given more power. And I think we ought to go and break up Silicon Valley because obviously in their scale, they haven't performed very well. Let's be brutally frank. If we're to believe TikTok, the power of TikTok, which is evident, self-evident, and if you believe the power or the nascent power of DeepSeek and other things that are being released right now. So I also believe you have to have kind of massive. We can't be in a situation where the state underwrites and it gives the accumulation of power. If the revolutionary generation came back, they would spit on the floor. And look, it's complicated. There are no easy solutions. I would love to have, I would like to have a quick investigation in exactly how the intelligence community missed this. There's so many questions, and I realize that people who are humanist or people who are religious and put their religion at the center of their being are going to be really on their back foot now with all the forces of world power against you. And the thing is going to be, you can't be a Luddite. To be a Luddite and to want this to slow down, or like the people in the Fahrenheit 415 or whatever, the book, are out in the woods, have memorized the book.
They're memorizing the great books.
The humanist.
Well, we'll have podcasts.
The human element in the humanist, you don't have that moment because right now we have to strike because you have to compete on a national security basis because this is like Sputnik. It's an arms race.
Right.
We're in a nuclear arms race. And I would just tell people, and particularly your readers, who do not agree with me politically on anything, if I can beseech you for one thing, is you must start to understand the moment we're in. This is an inflection point, not just for this country. This is an inflection point for the world. And President Trump will always listen to the entrepreneurs who have been very successful. It's just his default position. And I realize that this is going to be a complicated argument to make, but we're going to have to think this thing through collectively. This is a whole of society decision. What I want is a public discussion and debate over the biggest issues of the day, particularly the size and scope of the federal government and how we spend money and where we spend it and who's taxed and who's not taxed. Also, what comes after the post-war international rules-based order, because I think President Trump, thinking through hemispheric defense from the Panama Canal to Greenland,
up to Greenland,
is genius. And as being a naval officer, I would tell you, it has so much logic to it. There's so much going on, but give this guy a chance on his on the basic plan that he's got for the safety and security of this country, and with asking hard questions, et cetera. And let's get into these deep issues. The deep issues only the credential class can actually help us think through, because we're in a fix right now. We're in a real fix.
So Trump himself, let's try and wrap up there, right? Because early in our conversation, you said something about, how there's this idea that, populism is just like a cult of personality around Trump, or that Trump has all the power, right? And obviously that's not true in the sense that there really are big divides within the Republican coalition. There are big divides within this administration. What is true, though, is that President Trump has a lot of power, a lot of personal power over what many, many conservatives tend to think, right? He's got a lot of sort of trust built up, right? Where, people are like, well, I don't know exactly where to look, but I stand with Trump. If he's here, I'm there, right? He's got that. And then he also is, I think it's fair to say, not an ideological guy, a flexible guy, a guy who, listens to the last person in the room. And then he's a guy who has his own incentives, right? And so, you talked about TikTok, right? Donald Trump had one position on TikTok before he got some...
Oh, you're so cynical. You're so cynical.
I hate to be cynical about our president. He had that position, and now he has a different position on an issue that you say is an example of effectively a Chinese communist psyop infecting American life. So to what extent is populism, in all the forms you've described, just completely lashed to the personality and character of Donald Trump? And to what extent is there a world beyond it where, is there going to be a moment where populism needs a new leader, and you're back to that cattle call in New Hampshire, looking at different opportunities? Go on.
His default look. He's a guy from Queens. I've heard
that about him.
Yeah, I heard. Yep. President Trump. For people that don't know him, and I know for your audience that this is where they may opt out of the podcast.
They've seen a lot of him,
but he's actually an incredible, kind-hearted, empathetic individual. He is personally, and I kind of say he's a moderate. I'm a crazy right-wing populist, nationalist. President Trump balances everything. He's a common-sense conservative, he's common-sense populist nationalist. On our movement, the core base of MAGA is hard-welded to Donald Trump because they admire his moral clarity. Because, just for your audience, and I put him at the level of Washington and Lincoln in this regard. This is the age of Trump. when he was back in Mar-a-Lago, he knew at the time if he was to come back, they would come after him legally. They would try to bankrupt him. No person in American history, and go read Jack Kennedy's Profiles in Courage. You can add up the whole book, and it doesn't come close.
I'm not a big fan of Jack Kennedy's Profiles in Courage, but I take your point.
I should Ted Sorensen's Profiles in Courage.
Yeah, Ted Sorensen's Profiles in Courage. But go on.
You're so cruel. Moral clarity. He came back knowing all that was going to happen. It's almost like I call him the American Cincinnatus, to return. They want him to die in federal prison. I can tell you, as a guy that went to prison and not a camp, the federal prisons are very tough places, particularly if you're in your 70s. They're tough places. They're just tough and dangerous. And then the physical clarity, the physical courage to come back and stand up and say, fight, fight, fight on the assassination attempt made him both gladiator and leader. And so our movement will go where President Trump leads us. And I can disagree on policies and on the margin. And some of these, like on taxes, I'll really disagree on transhumanism. But at the end of the day, if he says we're going in this direction, I'm going to say, okay, I don't agree with this. And, I don't think it's the right direction, but I'm all in. Let's roll. And you just have to
wait. But you're all in for transhumanism if he says that. If he's like, Steve, get the chip in your brain. Let's do it.
Well, I think that I will convince President Trump. President Trump is, is a germaphobe. He's a germaphobe. He's not going to get a chip. He's a germaphobe. So it's hard, when he started shaking hands was a big deal. I don't think you're going to get a chip in the brain.
But so then what you're saying?
Okay, so there may be a couple of three, but I don't think he's definitely not a transhumanist, and we'll stop that part of it. It's going to be tough. I didn't say these weren't tough conversations, and we're going to have tough moments. Like, for instance, the deportation of all 12 million illegal aliens. I see already in the Republican Party some people, well, maybe we just get the criminals. Maybe we just get the bad ones. Maybe we do this.
Yeah,
we're going to have so many fights going down.
That's basically my position. But I'm...
Did I tell you, Ross, at the beginning of this, what pussies the conservatives are? You pussy.
Especially the ones who write columns for the New York Times, Steve.
You're too much of a humanist. That's your problem. You're too empathetic.
But just the vision that you have then of the next 4 years, I guess we can talk about a future, J.D. Vance presidency on another show. But your vision of the next 4 years is, in effect, a battle for Donald Trump.
Yes.
Right? That's what it comes down to. It's like I wrote a column over the weekend, the court, about the idea of like, this is court politics, right? And in a way, I'm just trying to end us on a pretty strong note here. You're basically saying that the future of Homo sapiens, the future of the human race itself, as we've known it for, 6,000 or 6 million years, depending on your, interpretation of creationism, depends on people arguing and contending for, the views and positions of Donald Trump.
I think that's correct. I think that the globalist elite thought he was dead, and he's been resurrected, and he resurrected himself, and then he has a movement that has his back. And the fundamental questions about this republic and the sovereignty of it, and about the direction of humankind, are all going to play out in the next 4 or 5 years. It's going to be the most intense part, I think, of modern political and really social history. And convincing President Trump, because he is our leader, convincing President Trump and he's a guy that listens to the arguments, and he's got tremendous common sense. It's incumbent upon us to be able to make those arguments to him, but he's got his own decision-making. President Trump's a very imperfect instrument. He'd be the first to tell you that, as I am and you are and Tucker and Elon and everybody. And it's his imperfections, I think, is just true greatness, that he overcomes that to be one of the most unique leaders in all world history. And we'll just have to see how it plays out. But the populist, the far-right war room, we're going to be fighting hard every day to make sure the voice of, we think, of our element on the far right of this movement is heard.
All right. Steve, thank you so much.
Ross, thank you so much. Appreciate you.